this information and trying to make it accessible and to connect to the corporate aspect, to the government aspect, and show the hows and whys of what's happening. So it still does that. And in fact, after the Snowden thing happened, I had a panicked week where I tried to re-edit the film and incorporate new Obama clips and try to bring in, that discussion. And I didn't really know where the Snowden thing was going. What the film was really a meditation on everything that had happened up until then. So, and I don't really think that everything that Snowden has brought forth is wildly revelatory, but there are documents, and the documents really, I mean, that's what you need is a smoking gun. Of course, there are lots of aspects of it that are, and as the Guardian and the Washington Post continue to reveal these things, I mean, it certainly shows that there's a lot we didn't know. So, to answer your question, I'm really grateful that Edward Snowden did what he did, and I'm grateful that the conversation continues in relationship to these issues, and I hope the film supplements that.
Do you feel that, and I think this is maybe the other panelists can answer as well, but all of you have been knee deep in this stuff. You've been immersed in it in the several years you took to make this film. You found out a lot of things that you're glad but maybe you wish you didn't in some ways. And do you think that as the broader public is having that experience, it's changing their reaction to the things you've laid out? Do they believe you more now?
I mean, they believed me before. I think that now there's even more anger and more there's like an impotent rage, and that's what we're trying to do with Trackoff.us, and there's a lot of organizations who came together to hopefully, I think, bring a lot of you here tonight, who are all working to see this change. And so that's my hope, is that impotent rage gets turned into some meaningful change.
So Sita, what can people do if they don't want to be trapped?
Actually, before I answer that question, I just want to respond to something that Colin was saying, and point out what I think is really valuable for me with this film is, there have been communities and generations of people that have been concerned about their privacy in the past. And one thing that this film does really well is it actually creates kind of a narrative, a set of stories and evidence that people can turn to and say, oh, well, now I know why my privacy is so screwed up, or, oh, wow, now I know why the case of Edward Snowden is so significant to our democracy. And so when you have a film like this, it actually allows people to kind of concretize things that have been happening that they may not have been aware of, and I think the film is really effective at that. Another thing that I just want to bring up is, towards the end of the film, the question is posed, what is privacy dead? And the way that I got into the issue of privacy was by thinking about communities that historically haven't had any, right? These are historically marginalized communities whose data has been exploited and used against them, whether that's redlining or racial profiling before stop and frisk, and so on and so forth. And so for me, the issue of privacy is something that touches the everyday person, and it's something that is deeply rooted, or the exploits of data mining and data profiling is something that's deeply rooted in systems of exploitation in this country, and I think we have a real opportunity to talk about this. So I'll leave Craig or Ash to also talk about what we can do.
Sure. I mean, I have a question related. I'll ask another question to set that up, which is, some people, especially those that tend to be tech savvy, so maybe not the historically marginalized communities, but their reaction, a lot of times when you talk about government change or policy change, which is something that's brought up a lot in the film, is, well, we can just hack our way out of these problems. Can we?
I'll take that. Kind of. The short answer would be no, unless you're going to build kind of all of the tools and all the software and all the services that you use, right? So a common debate here is you can always use encryption, you can use Tor, and you can use BGP, you can use OTR off the record. chats to security communications. But in fact, we learn time and time again, these systems can also be backdoored, right? Unless you are actively mitigating attacks against your computer platform and you're securing and reviewing the software. We know the government and other hackers and attackers sending Trojan software or backdooring encryption software we use. So it's very difficult for the average person, unless they're very diligent and expend a lot of resources mitigating attacks and protecting themselves, to really have a sense of anonymity or privacy online. I feel like it's a hard bargain. So I would say the short answer would be no.
So you wrote a piece. Is it somebody else want to jump in on that side?
I'll just add one thing quickly, which is, so I've been involved in a number of conversations where we're actually trying to teach activists, for example, to use technology as one means to protecting themselves against government surveillance or otherwise. And we always communicate in these trainings or these sessions that technology is not the sole answer. You actually need to think about privacy and surveillance in a more holistic way. And so that means thinking about your technological resources that are available to you. It means thinking about the nature of your social networks. It means thinking about who owns the tools of communication that you use, and really trying to understand that context before you start potentially jeopardizing you or your friends or your allies and so on and so forth. So technology is important. It's not the only solution, and I think that, at least in this panel, I think that we're well represented in thinking about multiple solutions that need to integrate with one another in order to be successful.
Well, and that's what's interesting too, is, it really comes down to trust, right? And this is what we saw with LavaBit recently, where those users were actually right to trust that company because he shut it down the second that it was going to be compromised. But that's not something that we can expect necessarily from every organization that's out there. And I think when there's been this sort of flurry lately about Google users not having an expectation of privacy. I think the most interesting aspect of that is the idea of someone else sending an email to a Gmail user. And does that person also not have an expectation of privacy?
Should they?
Yes.
Of course they should.
So that raises, as this technology advances, and Ashkan, you wrote a piece not too long ago in the Technology Review, MIT Technology Review, which I thought was really interesting, and talking about how in some ways, when it came to government surveillance, maybe we used to be able to assume some level of protection just because the technology wasn't there to get everything. But that we're getting really close to that no longer being an issue for those who are doing the surveilling. And so we need to I'm probably butchering your argument, which I'll expect you to make much better. But I think that raises some pretty big questions for, if that's the case, if the obstacles are no longer technological to sweeping up, vacuuming up all this information, what can we do and what laws need to change?
Oh, right. So the piece you're talking about is actually an excerpt of an upcoming paper that I'm working on around the cost of surveillance and the shifting costs with technology. And one of the assumptions is that there have always been structural limitations that protected our privacy. So we didn't necessarily need laws to prevent helicopters from flying over our house or drones from coming to our windows before there were helicopters and drones, because that capability didn't exist. But technology changes that such that it's now possible and potentially even cost-effective to do so. And so as we, one of the use cases I'm looking at is location tracking. So you could always surveil someone. You could always follow someone around on the street by foot. And you could even do it covertly by having, say, 5 police officers surrounding them in a grid formation so that you don't tip off the suspect. But that would cost you 5 police officers full-time around the clock, rotating shifts. That would have a burden of cost, and so you would probably choose your suspects wisely, because tracking one person would mean you might lose another person that's a more valuable target. Technology's changed that. We can now, from the cell carriers, we know that they turn over kind of location information about individuals from the cell companies pretty regularly. We know that law enforcement can easily get this for rates of something like, I think some of the figures were $100